What's growing on, gardeners? Fall is officially here, and many gardeners are starting to think about putting their garden beds to rest for the winter. Don't do that until you watch this video. One of the biggest mistakes that I see tons of gardeners make is they leave their garden soil exposed and unprotected throughout the winter. This is a colossal mistake, and on this video I'm going to explain to you exactly why and what you can do to prevent disaster.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom apparel and gear.
For the record, I am making this video in fall because I most often see this problem throughout the winter. That is when people tend to leave their garden soil exposed and unprotected. But that being said, these things hold true 365 days a year. No matter what time of year it is, leaving your soil exposed and unprotected is a gigantic no-no. That's because soil is far more than meets the eye. This isn't just some inert growing medium. This is a living, breathing medium comprised of colonies of trillions of bacteria and fungi living in harmony, constantly decomposing the organic matter that is such a critical component of soil. And it is this life cycle of the bacteria and the fungi that make up that soil microbiome that keeps the plants healthy and keeps them in good shape. It is constantly providing nutrients and aeration to the soil, and this is the most critical component in the health of your plants. This is why you will hear so many experienced gardeners say, feed your soil, not the plants, because it's not possible to have healthy plants without healthy soil. Think of it this way: is it possible to have a healthy human body without having a healthy gut? Well, I don't think so. That's because there are actually more living creatures inside your gut than actual cells in your body. Yes, it's true. The bacteria that colonizes your gut actually outnumbers your very own cells that make you who you are, something like 9 to 10 to 1. So you are already a minority in your own body. And what happens when we eat foods that contain lots of pesticides or are difficult to digest or lack the nutrients that we need, and we have bad digestion and an unhealthy gut? Well, we may develop things like allergies and food intolerances and all kinds of autoimmune conditions. Who knows? We are really just cracking the surface as to how important a healthy gut is to the human body. So just like you can't have a healthy body without having a healthy gut first, you can't have healthy plants without having healthy soil for really the same reason. And there is possibly no better way to kill off the healthy microbiome inside your soil by leaving that soil exposed for long periods of time. And this is one of the critical, huge mistakes that I see so many gardeners make. At the end of the fall or beginning of winter, they rip out all of the plants in their garden and they just let their soil sit for months throughout the winter, completely exposed to the elements. So what exactly happens when you leave your soil unprotected for long periods of time? Well, there is that 3, 4, or 5 month period in many people's winters where they are not gardening that soil is sitting exposed to the sun. And the sun has strong UV rays that beat on that soil all throughout that time period. And many people may think, oh, well, the sun is weak in winter. It doesn't matter. Yes, it is weakest in the winter, but you still have UV exposure. So if those UV rays are beating on your soil for 3, 4, 5, 6 months at a time, it is like a constant bleaching and sterilization process that is happening to the top few inches of your soil. So all of those beneficial fungal and bacteria colonies that are living in the first few inches of the soil basically get wiped out, or at least have their numbers severely reduced. So you will have partially sterilized soil and a damaged microbiome when you go to plant your plants in the spring. But that's not all. When you leave your soil completely unprotected, it's also getting beaten by rain, by snow, by ice, and that water cycle is also flushing your soil of nutrients and washing away organic matter. So not only are you bleaching and sterilizing the soil from the sun, but you're washing away any residual nutrients in the soil. So when you go to plant in the spring, not only will you have a damaged microbiome, but you'll have less nutrients locked in those soils as well. And this is one of the reasons why many gardeners see very slow growth in the beginning of spring after they plant out their garden. Their soil is very depleted, both in terms of nutrients and the microbiome, so they have to wait for the microbiome to build back up in the warm weather. And if you planted your vegetables with something like an organic fertilizer, well, that organic fertilizer has to be decomposed by that microbiome, which is probably in pretty bad shape. So you already have cool temperatures working against you. Well, you'll also have a depleted microbiome that won't be able to efficiently process the organic matter and the fertilizers that you added alongside your plants. So things are going to be slow for you until it recovers. But things can get even worse for you. Just like neighborhoods, soil has a population density, and it's very important that we populate the soil with as many good bacteria as possible, because if we have holes and we have room for more bacterial colonies to grow, well, now we may make room for pathogenic bacteria. So if we deplete all of the good bacteria colonies that we work so hard to grow throughout the growing season, well, now bad pathogens can possibly work their way into the emptiness, into the voids in that population density. So one of the best ways to actually keep disease pressure lower in your garden is to constantly keep your soil fed and protected so those good bacterial colonies thrive and there won't be any room for the bad ones. So how exactly do we protect our soil? Well, I think there are 4 main ways. The best way to protect your soil is to constantly grow things in it. And if you always keep something growing in it, the soil will stay consistently protected. That's because all of the roots of the plants, well, they create a beneficial association with the soil and the microbiome. So all of these sweet potato roots that you see, they are actually harboring beneficial colonies of fungi and bacteria. So that keeps them healthy. In addition, all of the leaves that you see, well, that completely protects the soil from the harsh UV rays of the summer and the fall sun. So my soil is being shaded perpetually by these sweet potato leaves. And as another main benefit, because I have roots that are growing throughout the soil, that is protecting the soil from erosion and washout. So when we get our torrential thunderstorms, those roots hold that soil into place so it doesn't get damaged and wash away from the storms. So the best way to keep my soil healthy is, as soon as I harvest those sweet potatoes, I should plant something else in its place, something cold hardy like lettuce or spinach or beets or some other cool weather crop that will do well throughout the fall and into the winter. But what happens if you won't or can't grow out in your garden all winter long, or you can only plant out a certain portion of your garden and some of your garden beds are left exposed? Well, the next best thing to do is to mulch over your garden beds. So what should you use as mulch? Well, any natural mulch would do. My rule of thumbs are, don't use a dyed mulch because that's usually ground up construction lumber that's artificially dyed to look like wood. Don't use a rubber mulch because they're made out of old tires and other refuse you don't want in your garden. Don't use a stone mulch because they don't break down and add any organic matter to your garden. Any kind of real wood-based mulch, any kind of bark mulch, pine straw, chopped up leaves, wheat straw, anything that is truly a natural mulch will be just fine. But that being said, I do think some are better than others. I used to use a lot of wood and bark-based mulches in my garden, and while they do make fantastic mulches in terms of weed suppression and water retention, I have found that they're not the best to use in the garden because of the generally large chunks that make it very difficult to dig rows and sow seeds. So because these wood chunks tend to be so large and they take a long time to break down, if you direct sow things into your garden and you dig a lot of trenches, you have to basically take a rake and pull all of the wood chips and bark back. So for that reason, I have largely moved to using these exclusively for fruit trees where I don't have to pull the mulch back ever. But for my garden, I like to use finer mulches moving forward. One of the best mulches that I've found for garden beds is actually chopped up shredded leaves. You can take deciduous leaves and then run through them with a lawnmower and then collect all the choppings, and that stuff works perfect for raised garden beds because it's very fine and they tend to break down pretty quickly and they don't leave a big mess in your beds. But what do you do if it's not the fall and you don't have access to deciduous tree leaves? For example, where I live, there's very few deciduous leaves in the forest and I really can't use them. My solution has largely been wheat straw. That is wheat straw, not hay. Hay tends to contain a lot of seeds, whereas wheat straw is a byproduct of the grain industry. So usually after they're actually done harvesting the wheat or oats or sorghum, what's left over at the bottom is then repackaged as wheat straw. Now there are some concerns about using wheat straw in the garden because there could be residual pesticides and residual seeds inside the wheat straw that could harm your garden or cause weed seed germination. So this is what I do to kind of get around that problem. What I do is I buy my wheat straw 2 months in advance and I let it sit outside in the sun and the rain, and the sun and the rain actually starts breaking it down. This will give the time it takes to wash away any residual pesticides and to try and stop any weed seed germination. Like here you see some residual wheat straw seeds that are starting to germinate just a little bit here or there. These wheat straw bales are probably about 5 or 6 weeks old. These wheat straw bales are older. These are over 2 months old. So these have broken down considerably, and these are about at the perfect point where I can start using these in my garden. A lot of people ask me, where do you even get wheat straw? Well, I get mine from a farm supply store, so find a place that sells chicken feed and things like that. They almost always carry wheat straw. If you can't or don't want to put mulch over your garden soil, one of my favorite solutions is to cover them in a weatherproof, UV-resistant tarp. This is actually one of my favorite things to do, and it's also one of the fastest things to do. These are leftover beds that I was growing in early summer. Once I ripped out all of the old spring crops, I placed the tarps over them after I put some compost down first. And that compost has been sitting, decaying and breaking down and re-nutrifying that soil since. I also mix some kitchen scraps into these raised beds for good measure. And why I like this so much is the waterproof tarps not only completely shield the ground from the sun, it also prevents all washout from the rain, because we get a ton of rain here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, and it builds heat from the sun. So because the tarps hold in heat, it's actually accelerating the decomposition of the compost that I placed inside these raised beds. So for me, it has been a win-win-win scenario. And if you're curious how I re-nutrify my beds in between plantings, I will link to a video both above and down below in the video description. And for your convenience, I'll also drop links directly to those tarps that I use because they are just awesome. And the fourth way to cover your garden soil would be to sow some kind of cover crop. And that's probably your only option if you have vast tracts of land and you have to cover acres, because you're just not going to be able to buy that much mulch or that many tarps. It just wouldn't be feasible. Now, the downside of using a cover crop is that will probably require you to cut and till it under in the spring. So if you practice no-till gardening, you're probably out of luck if you have to use a cover crop. I honestly don't know what the solution would be if you want to be a no-till farmer on acres and acres of land. That would be pretty difficult. But that's because I don't personally have a lot of experience with cover crops, because I grow in a backyard garden in raised garden beds. So if you're a backyard gardener with raised beds, the cover crop thing probably isn't an option for you anyway. But whatever you decide to use to cover your soil, hear me and hear me clear on this one. Please do not use compost as the thing that you use to cover your soil, because if you do that, you're effectively defeating the purpose of using compost. We add compost to our gardens for two primary reasons. The first reason is to add lots of organic matter and trace nutrients to our soil, but the second reason is to add beneficial bacteria colonies to our soil. We largely are gardening in a bacteria-rich soil environment that's different than a fungal-rich soil environment, which you usually find growing trees in a forest floor. So if you place that compost on top of your garden and then you don't do anything with it, you don't cover that compost, well, it's just going to sit and get sterilized by the sun all winter long. So all of those beneficial bacteria colonies that you added to your garden, you're losing them if all you're doing is putting down compost on top of your soil and then just letting it sit unprotected. So please, I beg you, if you add compost to your soil and then you're not going to grow in that soil for a long period of time, cover it with mulch, cover it with a tarp, cover it somehow. Now, I want to touch on one thing for the gardeners amongst us in colder climates that get snow. I have been asked many times, does snow count as soil cover? And the answer to that is kind of yes and kind of no. If your garden soil is covered in snow, that will reflect the UV, that will hold in the nutrients of the soil and protect washout, and it actually insulates the fungal and bacterial colonies. So it's actually not a bad thing for your soil at all, and as it slowly melts, it very slowly hydrates that soil, which is very good. So yes, snow in and of itself is kind of like a soil cover, but the problem is the snowy season is just a small fraction of the overall dormant season if you're not growing in your garden all winter long. You're going to go through a period of probably weeks or months in the late fall and early winter where there is not total snow coverage, and then after the snow melts, there's also going to be a period where it's probably still too cold to plant things out in your garden and there's no snow there protecting it. So for that reason, snow is not going to give you coverage throughout the entire season. And you also may have warm spells in between where the snow melts and you're left with weeks of unprotected soil. So snow is beneficial while it's there. There's no real reason to remove it. But that being said, do not rely on snow as a method of protecting your soil because it's just going to account for a tiny fraction of the time that you're not growing in the garden, most likely. And that right there is why soil covers are so important and a few ways that you can protect your garden soil if you are not growing in it for long periods of time. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life in my garden or that I featured in this video, I have them all linked down in my video description in my Amazon storefront. So expand the video description, click on the Amazon link, you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Want to see a surefire way on how to freak out a hound dog?
Walk.
Dale, what are you doing, buddy? You want to go somewhere? Where do you want to go? Show me. Show me what you want. Oh, you want to go for a walk? Okay, okay. Well, what time is it, buddy? Oh my goodness, it's so late. It's 7:07. I've been making you wait all day. Your daddy's terrible. We're gonna go for a walk, buddy, now that it's nice and cool out. It's nice and cool and beautiful. Let's go for our walk.